I'll just begin by saying, to sort of reassure the officers on the financial side, that so long as Mrs O'Flynn doesn't find out, I'm expecting to cover the cost of the election address for the Cambridge constituency, which I believe we can do. What I want to do is an A4 leaflet folded, so the inside is a poster, a window poster, and we can get that to all postal addresses in Cambridge, about 40,000 houses. So, and also the deposit, which I'll confidently expect to get back, even on the basis of that poll in August or September or whenever it was. Now, particularly addressing the people, from the locality, from King's Hedges or Arbury Ward, who haven't been to UKIP meetings before, I want to say I'm standing in Cambridge because Cambridge is in my blood. I was born here. I was born in Bedsit in Rathmore Road, just off Cherry Hinton Road. I went to the Morley School, primary school, followed that by going to Parkside, as was then Parkside Community College. It's got a much posher badge and name these days. And then I went to Long Road Sixth Form College, and then I had the immense privilege of going to Cambridge University, definitely still the best university in the world, where I studied economics at King's College. So I'm in quite an unusual position, I think, of having grown up in Cambridge and gone to university here as well. And I think I may be the only candidate on the ballot paper who can remember, not all of you remember this, but can remember Snowy in the Market Square, yes, who bought his first LP from Andy's Records, yep, in the same Market Square. Can remember when you could go walking in the Botanical Gardens for free on a Sunday, and often did that too. So I know Cambridge well, and I know it on the side of the city as well as the university, and I'm very proud of having gone to Cambridge University, and I think Cambridge University is a fantastic asset for Cambridge, but it's not the be-all and end-all of Cambridge, and no doubt what's happened with the university's scientific base and the science park and the high-tech jobs which have come to Cambridge are a fantastic thing for Cambridge. But I also know that there are people who haven't been able to share in that prosperity. There are people indeed who've grown up in Cambridge who've had to leave Cambridge because they couldn't afford to live here. There are people who are grown up, children still living in box bedrooms in the family home and not able to get on the housing ladder in Cambridge, even if they're working. And the average house price here is now over £400,000, and the social housing waiting list seems to get longer and longer. And I want to approach this election from the perspective of those people in Cambridge too, and I think sometimes that the other candidates, they're certainly highly aware of the university's role. I'm not sure how many of them really understand the full gamut of Cambridge life and what it's like to grow up indeed in this city without money behind you, without a sort of prestigious job on the science park too. Now, one of the candidates, the Labour candidate, has taken, I've noticed recently, to wearing a Cambridge United football scarf around the place. I've also got one of those, but mine, the difference is that mine's 35 years old, and has probably, I think it's not unfair to say, done a few more supporter miles than his. And you know, to me, being a Cambridge United supporter growing up, meant it's not just about Tom Elliott or Ryan Donaldson, but Tom Finney and Alan Biley. And again, I don't know how many of you would have gone to Cambridge United as youngsters, but I've been there through thick and thin, and so it's slightly great that Mr. Zeichner is now posing as top political Cambridge United fan in the city, and I'll give him a run for his money on that one every time he wants. So Cambridge has changed dramatically since I was growing up, and I think it's fair to say it's largely changed for the better. When I was growing up, the Cambridge Junction was the cattle market. There was no Cambridge Junction. The Corn Exchange concert venue was closed for many years. I think it probably reopened in about 1986, but for many years there was no non-university live music venue, and some of you may remember there wasn't much in the way of restaurants in Cambridge either. There was, I remember, a good Chinese restaurant over towards the Grafton Centre, and there were certainly a couple of good curry houses. But now, what you see before you, shopping-wise, restaurants-wise, leisure-wise, is quite something. And again, I want everyone in Cambridge to be able to feel that they're part of this. When I was growing up too, I was keenly aware of what was called the division between town and gown. And I remember once, I think I just started at university at King's College, walking out of term time, so the students weren't there, between a really crowded Lion Yard and Market Square, throbbing with shoppers, onto King's Parade, completely and utterly deserted. And I went to school with friends who quite honestly admit that they've never walked along the backs of the colleges, couldn't tell you which colleges are where, and are kind of alienated from a key part of their own city's culture and heritage. And I think that's a very great shame. And I've noticed in recent years that more and more of the colleges seem to be charging for admission to walk through the grounds, and I think that's an enormous shame. And I would like the council and the university to get their heads together on this and perhaps issue a Cambridge citizens card to any long-term resident who perhaps has been here for 5 years and is a law-abiding citizen of Cambridge, to allow them to feel that this belongs to all of us, this great academic scientific tradition, and to be able to show the card and to walk through the colleges unimpeded, obviously not in exam times, that's different, but to get a feeling of enjoyment and ownership, and to try and break down that town and gown division. I was actually staying with my mother the last few days in Cambridge and reading a book called Town and Gown, the 700-Year War in Cambridge, and I'm afraid it can still feel a bit like that. And I know the university does a lot to outreach and encourage bright kids to apply, you know, and that's even more important in this era of £9,000 a year tuition fee, tuition debt. But I still know that there are very large numbers of people growing up in Cambridge who feel that the university and the college tradition has given them nothing. And really, if you walk past the colleges and you're not linked into that, you naturally would feel a bit standoffish that it's not for you. And I would like that to change. But most importantly, I think Cambridge has been run in the interests of a fairly privileged and intellectually very high-powered, no doubt, liberal elite, and they've lost touch and they've lost consciousness about what life is like for the real people of Cambridge. Well, the brilliant academics, they are real people, but for the people who try and make an honest living in Cambridge, the problems they face. Now, we've had through the Labour Party since 2004 and the Liberals and the Conservatives since, complete open door immigration to more than 24 European countries. And I am convinced, and indeed there was a Treasury Committee selected report of the House of Commons out recently which backed this up finally, that this has had a very depressing impact on pay scales and wage rates for working class jobs, for unskilled, semi-skilled and manual labour. And I was looking at some of the university's own pay rates, and there are several grades below what is termed a living wage paid by the university. And remember that this is a city with the average house now costing more than £400,000 a year. So there's a whole tranche of jobs in Cambridge which are filled by people who can't afford to live in Cambridge and maybe have to commute 20 or 30 miles from the north of the county, aren't able to access the extended families they used to be when they were growing up. And it was not unusual in Cambridge, particularly on the council estates, to have grown-up cousins living around the corner from each other, and all the children playing out together. And we've definitely lost that, and we've lost that sense of neighbourliness. But again, my Labour opponent is very big on saying he thinks Cambridge is a divided city, and he's right about that. But rather than simply just shout on about employers should pay this living wage, which I believe if they can afford to, they certainly should, why don't we get control of the migration system again. So we can have a points-based system. The university can get its brilliant minds from all over the world and the potential Nobel Prize winners and inventors who can generate jobs, employment and prosperity for everyone. But what Cambridge doesn't need is more unskilled workers from abroad coming to lower those pay rates for some of the more kind of manual and clerical work in the university and other employers as well. That's not going to be a net benefit, and many of those people will end up competing for the very scarce social housing in Cambridge, and indeed the private rented housing with equal access to housing benefit too. UKIP has some policies in this area which are pretty unfashionable politically and maybe a bit politically incorrect, but we say there should be extra social housing points for people with a long-standing link to the city and the part of the city where they're applying for social housing. It shouldn't be the only factor that's considered, but it should be taken into account. So the community will be stronger if there are more people who've known each other for longer and have grown up in that community and can raise families in the community where they themselves grew up. We also say that where a social housing tenancy is held by someone from overseas, which isn't ideal anyway, because we want the migrants who can add value and not draw welfare resources, but there are many people born overseas who do legitimately hold social housing tenancies, that they should not be able to exercise the right to buy and diminish the social housing stock that's available to the British people. We also say too that the various help to buy schemes that the government is running, at the moment they have to give equal access to those schemes and that funding to people from every country across the EU, and we say that that's wrong as well. And in a moderate, an unthreatening way, we say that the British people have their own housing crisis, and in cities like Cambridge it's extremely acute, and our own young people deserve the chance to live in the community they grew up in as well as to work there. So that's an area where I think that the other candidates, who are all fully signed up Europhiles, I sometimes joke that it's me against 4 Liberal Democrats, because the incumbent is a Liberal Democrat, the Green candidate is a former Liberal Democrat, the Conservative candidate is a former Liberal Democrat, an environmental lawyer, and doesn't, to me, I've been unable to trace much connection with Cambridge at all. I believe that she attended a sort of A-level crammer here for a while, but from some of her remarks she seems to believe that Cambridge has no social problems at all and can just concentrate on becoming a global environmental hub. Well, I don't think that sums up the views of people in this city who have in the past voted Conservative. And I'm confident that many of those long-standing Conservatives can come across to the UKIP cause in this general election. But I'm also aware that many people in Cambridge, in wards that have traditionally been Labour, there are wards in this city where Labour still really weighs the vote rather than counts it, but usually on very low turnouts. And there are people who believe that the Labour Party they now see is not the Labour Party they grew up respecting and even revering. And we all remember that monstrous sneering tweet from Emily Thornberry about the man with the England flags on his house and the white van in the driveway, and Ed Miliband tried to say afterwards that whenever he saw a white van he felt feelings of respect. Well, yeah, perhaps he should tap on the driver's window and ask for tutorials on eating a bacon sandwich, because he could certainly do with brushing up on that. But we also had Tristram Hunt the other day sneering about people who were taught by nuns, and you can imagine how that's gone down with Catholic voters for whom once Labour was the natural port of call. And Chuka Omuna, another expensively educated metropolitan male, was referring to people who go to nightclubs that he doesn't think are trendy enough for him as trash, which I think is a terrible way to address young British people. And I don't know if you've noticed that Andy Burnham, the Shadow Health Secretary, he seems to want to, he was once an ultra Blairite smoothie he now seems to want to reinvent himself as Andy Capp, the old Daily Mirror working man in the cartoon. And I've noticed that his accent seems to be a lot more northern than it was a few years ago. But my message to him and to Labour is that he can get busy flattening his vowels, and UKIP will get busy flattening the Labour Party, particularly among working class voters. So my pitch for Cambridge is that I've seen both sides of this city. I know that there are people, young people particularly in this city, who aren't getting a fair crack of the whip amid all this glory about the Cambridge phenomenon, and it does have the potential to provide good employment at all levels of the labour market. And you know, we do in this city have the potential to put our own young people first on housing issues as well, but it's not being done at the moment, and it means there are far too many people for whom going out to work is something they must do out of a sense of duty, because it's hardly worth their while. It's hardly worth their while. They'd be more likely actually to get a social housing property if they didn't work, and this cannot be right in the 21st century in perhaps what is now the most successful city in Britain, that it's got nothing to offer its own young working class people. Not just working class people, there are young middle class people in Cambridge who again couldn't possibly ever, when they come to have a family, they couldn't possibly ever afford to live in Cambridge where they were born, where they grew up. And I think that has to be wrong. So I'm going to emphasise housing. I'm going to emphasise as well the impact of uncontrolled immigration, particularly for those unskilled, manual, semi-skilled jobs, on what's happened to working class life in this city and the dispersal of the communities that used to be so strong and used to exist. So Cambridge, I would be tremendously proud to be elected the MP for Cambridge. I'm apparently 50 to 1 against at the bookies, but I think those are good odds, because the intriguing thing here is that the left-wing vote, perhaps what the middle-class left-wing vote is split so many different ways, would mean that I think it's likely that only one candidate in this election in Cambridge is going to get more than 25% of the vote. I think it's hard for UKIP in Cambridge to get much more than 25% of the vote, but I think 25% would be enough, and that's a realistic target to achieve. And as we've heard, we've come on hugely in terms of our slate of candidates for local government, where we now have a candidate in, I'm sure it'll be a memory test here, we have Trumpington and Coleridge and Cherry Hinton and Arbury and East Chesterton. I think, Elspeth, you're going to stand in Unum, is that? Yeah. So have I missed any out, Martin? That's pretty much, so we're pretty much on half the wards filled. It'd be lovely to get a complete slate, but I have to confess that I don't see us having a landslide in Petersfield or Castle or Market wards particularly. But the key thing is to fill those wards with UKIP candidates in areas where the real Cambridge working people still live and are frustrated. So I'd love to have a candidate for Abbey Ward and King's Hedges Ward in particular, if anyone feels so moved. And it may be a case this year that winning council seats is too much of a stretch from where we're coming from these small shoots. But I'm convinced we can get some good second places, and in 2016 we can be looking to crack council seats, and that would be tremendously exciting. And I do know from the action days we've had already that there is an appetite for UKIP in Cambridge, and that many people in Cambridge have felt disenfranchised and that they couldn't support any of these other parties and that they just didn't speak their language, and are delighted to see UKIP putting leaflets through doors and really taking on the challenge of Cambridge, because there is also a vigorous and quite aggressive doctrinaire hard left element that would love to keep UKIP out of Cambridge. Well, that's not going to happen, and I want 2015 to be the year when we really put down a marker that we believe in many parts of this city we can not only be competitive, but we can win. And it's just possible that this split in the sort of left-wing middle-class vote and I count the Conservative candidate as part of that, will split them so much that it's possible for UKIP to run this seat extremely close in the parliamentary election. Being the economic spokesman for UKIP and having a handle in some of the manifesto deliberations and strategy meetings, as well as being an MEP, means that although we've done a series of action days so far, I haven't been able to be on the ground as much as I'd like. That's going to be changing over the next few weeks. I will be able to dedicate more time, albeit with shuttle runs up to London for no doubt incessant meetings. Quite a few national television appearances, which although won't predominantly and specifically be about Cambridge, I think will be good news in terms of visibility of your Cambridge candidate. So I'm really looking forward to the next 3 months. I'm looking forward to knocking on lots of doors in Arbury and Abbey and East Chesterton and King's Hedges and Cherryington and Coleridge and Trumpington too, where I know a lot of the people there in some of the bigger houses are particularly interested in our position on abolishing inheritance tax altogether. And you may know it strikes in at the moment at 325,000, and it's not possible now, barely possible, to buy a 3-bedroom terrace in Cambridge for that price.
So every householder in Cambridge is due to fork out inheritance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe working people who've bought their house out of income that's already been taxed shouldn't be taxed again when they pass away and want to hand something onto their chosen heirs, often their children, and I think that message is resonating too. So I'm up for it, I hope you're up for it, and let's put UKIP on the map in Cambridge. Thank you.
Yeah.